You just announced to the entire city that you are a villain and a murderer. Hmm. Turn yourself in. I'm the Riddler.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. And in the past, I've spoken a lot about the show Gotham, and how it had some solid iterations of some of Batman's best villains in his rogues gallery. I've spoke about how this show was the first to give a good, true interpretation of the Penguin. Their interesting take on the Harley Quinn character. Hell, they even had 1.5 solid versions of the Joker. And today, I'm here to highlight the absolute highlight. The name that was neglected from my list of top-tier Gotham villain performances that you at home certainly didn't forget to remind me about. I'm of course talking about the Riddler. Now there have been many Riddler performances brought to the big and small screen over the years, but I truly believe that this one stands out amongst the rest. It is the most true-to-form depiction of the character that I've ever witnessed. Never before, and probably never again, will an actor embody this character so perfectly. I'd love to know how this guy did it, but it just leads to too many questions. This man checks off every single Enigma tech box. He looks the part, he sounds the part, he acts the part, he is the part. This performance fires on all cylinders. What I really appreciate about this telling of the tale is that it gives us time with Edward Enigma before it shows us the Riddler. We're introduced to the character prior to his official origin story. And because of that, we get a better feel for who he is as a person, and not just a villain. While of course the two are actually one and the same, the show shows us his evolution and transition into becoming the iconic intellectual. Edward Enigma is always the Riddler. He's always the same guy, but he's not always quite as twisted. When we're first introduced to the character in the show, we're shown him at his purest. He's just a good-hearted goof with a fondness for riddles. Edward was shown to be incredibly intelligent, just not in social settings. He wasn't exactly people-privy. The one major difference between this Edward Enigma and the Edward Enigma from the comics is that this Riddler doesn't at first need to flaunt his intelligence around. He doesn't see himself as everyone else's superior. Actually, in a lot of ways, the character is constantly reminded of the contrary, often being bullied and made to look inferior to those he shares a workplace with. Now, this could be seen as being the antithesis of the character, but in a lot of ways, this actually plants the seeds for that future characteristic. His need to be acknowledged, and his desire to be seen as better than those who oppose him, come from a life of being overlooked and underappreciated. Now Edward Enigma needs to be seen, and more importantly, he needs to be seen for the genius that he truly is. This past for the character helps to build toward the inevitable future for him. When the show first starts, he just wants to help. He wants to utilize his intellect for good. Even going above and beyond at his place of employment, doing work that is blatantly outside his own field of expertise, no matter how often he's asked not to. In some ways, maybe Eddie is just trying to prove himself. Prove his worth both to himself and to those around him that believe him to be incompetent. Or maybe he just needs something to keep his brain active, because he's sure not getting any good conversations from the GCPD. There's a tragic development which I believe is better covered here than in most Batman media. More than in any origin comic I've ever read, or any movie or show that I've ever watched, Gotham emphasizes the tragedy that comes with being a little bit different. How being advanced and having an ability can actually alienate those around you. How what should be seen as a superpower, in some settings is seen as a weakness. Edward Enigma is a total outcast. A loner who spends his time trying to stimulate his brain by solving puzzles. Before he was out there committing all the crimes, he was actually helping solve them, starting out as a forensic science technician at the GCPD. So before he was a bad guy, he wasn't a bad guy. Edward starts off as a dude you want to root for. He's odd and quirky and funny in his own unique, zany way. He's the geeky guy who's chasing after the girl that's just out of reach. Although when he does actually reach her, that doesn't work out too well. But otherwise, that's a classic setup. And you can't help but want to see the loser prevail and defy the odds. But Gotham gives him no such luxury. Instead, we watch him constantly succumb to those odds, which sort of endears the viewer to the character. I think a lot of the time when you're showing one character pine for another and then constantly get turned down but not take the hint, it can make the character come off as creepy and overly persistent. But in this show, it's not that he doesn't take the hint, it's that he doesn't catch it. His love interest clearly doesn't have any love or interest in him, but she acts as politely as humanly possible in his presence. Because while she's not into him, she doesn't have anything against him, she doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And Edward doesn't catch on to this. For all the riddles he solved, human behavior in action and reaction just wasn't one of them. So when it comes to women, or actually come to think of it, people in general, Edward is overly oblivious. And just when things seem to turn around, what ideally would be a happy ending of the story instead is just the tragic beginning of another. The real start of the story. The series does a good job of highlighting his compulsion to leave behind clues. He does so against his own will, knowing that it's a bad idea but feeling compelled to do so. He even beats himself up over it later. Almost literally. And yet, he still can't help but sign his name Incognito. There's some part of him that needs to let those he's wronged to know that it's him that's wronging them. Well, if they're smart enough to deduce his identity, that is. This is one of the most integral parts of the character, and I don't think I've ever seen this done anywhere else in an on-screen adaptation. Most of the time, the Riddler's clues are really just shown to be either a product of his vanity or good old-fashioned revenge. Gotham is the first depiction where it seems like he doesn't have full control over what he's doing. I just feel like this is a part of the character that often comes off as very gimmicky. I like that this showcases this as a mental obligation rather than just a way of flaunting and flexing intellectual prowess. This is a genuine disorder, a trait that he's bound to against his will. I will say, though, that there are elements of this version of the character that I ultimately wasn't particularly fond of. The dual identity the show added to the character felt entirely unneeded. There are already multiple Batman villains with multiple personalities, and there are even more Batman villains who operate under some sense of duality. Riddler was like one of the few that didn't have that.
Stop doing that!
What?
That! Copying me!
Dude, it's a mirror, that's how they work.
The split Psyche wasn't a necessity to transition Riddler from face to heel. The story didn't need that. And even now, it just sort of feels super superfluous. The saving grace for this story, though, is how well Cory Michael Smith played both sides of the character, making each of his personalities feel entirely distinct. He managed to create a realistic conversation with less than two people. This guy played off himself quite well, essentially becoming a one-man show of sorts. Some of my favorite scenes of this character are actually the actor working with himself. So while this is an added aspect of the character that I didn't like conceptually, in execution I think it's pretty terrific. Some of the best self-acting I've ever seen. Again, not necessary for the plot or for the progression of the character. I think you could have done all this without it, but I'm not going to complain too much on something that's unnecessary but good. That second personality begins to dissipate over time as Edward embraces his darker nature. I will say in some ways, as he began to get closer and closer to the Riddler character that I knew, a part of me kind of felt a little bit let down. Not because he was bad in the role. I mean, yeah, the outfit was pretty bad. I wasn't a big fan of that, but that's fine. Not here to judge his wardrobe, I'm here to judge his acting. So, he fails the fashion show, but we're still giving him a standing ovation. He was everything you'd expect in a Riddler performance. I feel like the character was at its creative height in the earlier seasons of the show, when the story was building up to this inevitable end goal, because it was different from what I was used to seeing. And I could see how this character could one day eventually evolve into the other. It's just one of those things where I think that the journey to get to the destination was much more entertaining than the actual destination. It just felt a little underwhelming in comparison. When the show was making us root for him, but reassuring us that we shouldn't be, I think the character was the most interesting. Anything that came after was still great, it just, well, it was less great. The performance never got bad or dipped in quality. Just for me, the character was at his all-time best earlier on. I want to say more about when he actually became the villain, but all I can think to say is, wow, he did a really good job. It was like the character from the comics leaped onto the screen. I think I appreciate the character a lot more in its infancy. With all that being said, if you like this video and would be interested in seeing a video on Gotham's Hugo Strange, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Riddler. Riddler?
I was your least favorite YouTuber, V Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.